Hey, good evening, everyone. This is Professor York again, and I am excited to really have a good discussion this evening around the interview and a little bit more. The reason why I wanted to talk to you about this and provide this little video was because I was getting some surveys that were coming in from different students in the class, and to say the least, I was less than enthusiastic about what I was seeing, and I felt like it might be worthwhile to share some insights based on what I've done professionally, what I've learned from Scott Worthy, who teaches at UC Berkeley and Michigan State, as well as is a vice president of a market research firm down in Irvine, California. Been in business for 30 years, and also in teaching Business 310, where we use the get out of the building interview process. So, first of all, why we do interviews. And I think at the end of the day, you have to sort of sit back. And then one thing I want you to take away from this discussion is there's a lot that goes in to doing a good interview and extracting data. But you have to take a step back and ask, why are we doing this? And it ties back to your objectives. Okay, very, very clearly, it ties back to objectives. It defines the motivation for gaining data so you can make strategic and actionable decisions. And remember, what most businesses do for marketing is on the left-hand side. I call it shotgunning. We're throwing stuff against the wall. But really smart strategic marketers, as you can see on the guy on the right side, he's dialed into where the fish are because he's done the right market research. So don't be the type that just tries anything. Be a smart marketer. And that means you got to do your homework. And that means you have to do research to understand your market and your customers. And with that said, ties back to the concept of smart objectives. So we've talked about this concept beforehand, but I just want to bring it back that as we put together our survey, we need to be able to think about our objectives. So I'll relate a situation when I was reviewing some survey work that one of your classmates had shared with me and what feedback. And I'm looking through this survey and I'm going, what are your objectives that you want to get out of this data? And then more importantly, how does this tie into your core objective for your project that you're doing? And more importantly, how does it address the question or the scope question that we framed? And when we put that in perspective, as we look through the survey, what this gentleman recognized was, wait a second, I'm asking a lot of the wrong questions. And I'm looking for things that are not within scope. And I'm not doing the client a favor. I'm not doing our team a favor. So that's the purpose of this effort, is how do we ask the right questions? As you can see, it's not about you and what you think about, but getting beyond that. So as you can see in this cartoon, before we get to our risky assumptions that could create our entire business, what do you think of the font color of the packaging burst? Whoa, way off target. And so this is very important that we start thinking about a strategy on how we attack doing interviews and doing surveys. So as Scott Worthage points out, is design your interview around your client's key strategic issues. So interview starts with good strategy. So one of the things I learned from Scott over at UC Berkeley is that there's this magic circle. And you're going to work this circle. So this should become indelible in terms of your thinking process. And Scott spent literally about 2 hours, one class, going through the circle. No, I'm not going to take 2 hours, but I'm going to hit some high points. As you can see on the Right-hand side is about planning, and left-hand side is doing. We all get caught up in quadrants 2, 3, and 4 and forget about quadrant 1, which is actually the most important, which is understanding the problem. This is about getting back to the objective, identifying, clarifying the needs, defining research questions, and prioritizing and defining those objectives and working this with your client until you get sign off. Okay, this is very, very critical. If you don't have that really clear, and this is why it gets back to our concept about scope. If we don't have that really defined well, what happens is then we go get all over the place relative to our deliverables. We get distracted by what else the client is doing. And these are things that I've noticed with some of the project teams in class already. So remember, get back to the focus in terms of what your scope and what your job to do is. Once you have that defined, then you can select the appropriate research design. What are the data sources? What's the design? Is it qual? Is it quant? Is it descriptive, causal? And then, then we can get into talking about the sample that we have, what measurements we're going to use, if it's going to be an actual, what we will call questionnaire that you put online. You want it online? Do you want it live, etc.? And then you get into designing, development, and realistically, what would be ideal is that you pre-test your questionnaire and your data collection instruments so that at the end of the day you know it works. And you circle back to quadrant 1 to make sure that you're dialed in. Once you get that right, then you can go into execution. Gather, collect data, prep it up, analyze it, and interpret it and create knowledge. And this is what we call the so what. So when you are working through the McKinsey engagement and you read through, you'll see that come up. Okay, and it's something that I bring out in that focus objective, which is about understanding. That is taking just data and making it knowledge and being able to create conclusions and recommendations. And this is where you create credibility and value. And at the end of the day, is communicating those results. The report, the final report, presenting it, answering questions. And I like to have that report in mind when you develop and conduct your research. So what does that mean is, and I like to point out this article by Andreessen from Harvard Business Review, which talks about backward market research, which in essence is a concept of think about the report that you are going to give to the client as you start your research. So we've already talked about that concept about telling the ending of the story at the beginning. It's similar type of concept. And if you think about the concept that I've shared relative to focus in terms of the framework that we start building early on, when you are starting to organize your research process after you've framed your question, this is where it fits in. So when we do a discussion guide, you're going to have what we call key funnel areas, and you're going to have drill down questions. And this is really another tool that Scott had shared with me at Berkeley last summer. I thought this was just, to me, was very enlightening because I've been doing market research for years, but it gave me a tool that allowed me to blend with get out of the building and talking to humans concepts, which is, and the MOM test, which is making things more conversational, which you can do. But realistically, you keep in your mind these funnels, these areas that you're going to move your interviewee through. Or if you're going to design an actual questionnaire, you're thinking about these pieces. So you're organizing the pieces of your research in a logical fashion to address certain strategic funnel areas in the interview or the questionnaire. So I'm going to give you an example. I use a lot of times, I do advisory boards and do market question guide. And the funnels really help, and I'll use the example in the entrepreneurship space. Here, who the target audience is, how they're doing things, what the job to do, and what an MVP or minimum viable product looks like. So, the first funnel is you want to screen. Is this person in or out? Okay. And you could take the analogy to if you were dating someone and you would want to find out, is this person into food or not or whatever. And there's certain questions. So you want to find out if this is your target audience. You share common things, common interests. So in or out. Once you've done that, you're then going to get into attitudinal issues. Oh, okay. Why in the startup world? Why a startup? And why do you want to spend the time and money? If you're going to ask somebody out, you may find out like, I want to go out to this place dinner, but what's this person's passion around food or wine or whatever it might be? That may be something to really define, understanding what I need to position relative to an attractive place to go out. The third is experience. So you want to talk about experiences, what the entrepreneurs had, or in another case could be the person you're trying to ask out on a date is, hey, what's been a great experience for you going out, having dinner and drinking wine or whatever. Really to hone in what's important, what's been meaningful, what hasn't been meaningful. And then get into the job to do, which is, what it is, how much. And we, in the entrepreneurship world, called it the pains, gains, and the job to be done, or the needs. And what's the priority, and you can even drill down to the top one or two. If you're dating or trying to get someone to date, you may want to be whittling down and saying, what's been really, really a great experience or been terrible? And if you had that really wonderful experience, what's the top one or two? You're just trying to dial it in. Notice how you can, if you keep your funnels in mind, you don't even have to think about the questions. Questions drill down. They're just natural flow. And I found as a facilitator, if I keep the major issues in my mind, it's very easy to have those sub-questions to drill down, to go in deeper. And then we can see from the job to do is let's address it. Okay. The solutions and what worked or not. So I'm going to go again back to our example talking about someone you're asking out to go out for a date. You might go, okay, well, let's talk about a few restaurants in town. What you seen? Where would you like to go? What's worked, what hasn't worked? Oh, you like that place. I like that food too. Thai place. You remember this place here? Oh, yeah. Let's check it out. Really? Okay. What's your schedule like? Do you want to do lunch, or do you want to go Friday, Saturday night and check this place? I much prefer to go have dinner with someone that I know and we can enjoy it together, share the experience, etc. All of a sudden, you're able to define where you want to go in terms of that minimum viable product, as an entrepreneur should be doing with their business. Okay, what is this, what it looks like, we've just decided, okay, this is the restaurant and the time, boom, we've got a date. And then we value it. And in the business world, we value it by how important. That's where you're closing things and you're defining costs, etc. So anyway, this gives you sort of sense, and then you define your next steps from there. But this gives you sort of a framework, and that's the bottom line here is using funnels can be a very useful tool for organizing how you approach an interview. And actually, when you do an interview, it makes it easier because you're not necessarily looking down at the questions and just firing questions. You're now bringing into being a natural conversation. And that's really where we want to be, because that's where we can get people that feel comfortable. You're authentic, you're having an authentic conversation, and you're getting real data. You're getting real feedback. You're getting real emotions, and that's what you want. But that means at the end of the day, you have to get out of the office. We call it goob, get out of the building. And as you can see in this cartoon, it's like, yeah, if I were our teenage girl target, I would love our new product. How many of our clients are like this? Just think about it. They've made the decision. But the question is, have they talked to that customer? And that means you need to get out of the building. So, for instance, a team that's helping with launching new tasting room in Santa Barbara, you need to get down and talk to people. Talk to local shop owners. Talk to the Chamber of Commerce. Talk to the local Vintner Association. Talk to people on the street. Find out what's important to their experience, why they would stop off at a tasting room for a wine. What wines would they like? What would they like to see? Okay? Remember, it's not about you. It's about that customer. And as I said, what, leave the room? Come on. I know these are probably a bunch of hackers or something like that. But the reality is that we need to be connecting with the customer. So what do you do first? I'm going to give you 6 steps in terms of interview process. As we talked about defining objectives and then background research and prep. And this is very important. When I do interviews, I do some background research. I'll do secondary research. So I think you all have been exposed to Get Smart Fast. If you haven't, let me know. I will do a lecture to review it. We have wonderful library resources. Your secondary research gives you a foundation. From there, you can develop a few key topics and a dozen questions. I will literally have 8 major funnels, and I'll have, believe it or not, 20 to 30 questions that fill those funnels that I'll use for a 30 to 40 minute discussion. And what's the amazing thing is, we flow through the questions, it goes to the conversation. Remember also is that you have to identify the right people. And as you're doing this with you need to have your stakeholders. So you have to go back to your clients and make sure you have their input, that the questions and what you're doing objective fits with what their vision and their needs. And we talked about in terms of quadrant 1, and then off to engaging the interviewee. So one of the things I like to use is an interview guide. And I've seen some of the stuff that you guys have shared with me in terms of questions, but I think that the very important thing that you see that's different is I just don't have questions. I have objectives. And what I try to do is break each funnel out. So keep in mind that you're tying a funnel area with a particular objective in mind with particular questions that you want to address. McKinsey does this as well. In terms of their example, they try to keep it very terse, as you can see, in terms of how they lay it out. But they have a working script, and they try to internalize it so it is natural. And as I talk about, get the right customer, okay? That doesn't mean, talk to your grandmother's bridge club, okay, about a nap. You got to figure out the right people, okay? So that means if you are working on trying to do a PR campaign for a wine that is going to be developed as a affinity project, you need to get talking with people down in Hollywood, in the business, who are in the publications, who are in the managers. So you really understand what they're looking for, or the publication heads. And when I worked doing PR work about 10 years ago, I was placing tons of PR articles for this one company. I was on the phone all the time with the editors and with folks who would be my byline people, so we could develop stories that met the editor's needs, and meanwhile have story ideas as well and content that would be credible, that a physician from Johns Hopkins, for instance, would want to put his name to. And what I always recommend when you do your interview is, first and foremost, is frame it. That means when you do an introduction, I want to do an interview, send a note. I'd like to do an interview. The purpose of the interview is this. This is what we'd like to cover. Is there a good time? So here's an example of how connected, and this is very important, is I know you through, and many times I will ask for referrals. Okay, the purpose, the background on this, we're trying to do this with Cal Poly students, but we're really trying to understand buying habits of millennial wine drinkers. It's only going to take 15-20 minutes. Here's a few key questions, and maybe here's a few proposed times. Sounds like our introductory letter to our client. You need to use that approach as you look at in terms of engaging people for interviews as well. Another approach that we use to framing the interview is verbois, or the very short. It stands for very few wizards properly ask for help. What does that mean? Is, again, back to framing, is there 5 key. You have to have a vision. Who are you? What are you trying to accomplish? Frame it. Expectations, purpose, etc. Weakness. Highlight your challenge or problem you have. And put your interview in a pedestal. You're an expert in this area. Dr. So-and-so recommended. I do this all the time when I do doctors. Oh, Dr. Liebel, who is like the expert in the world in psoriasis. I talked to him. He said, and I asked him, who else? Oh, yeah, you should be. Oh, Dr. Liebel said that? By all means. I would love to be able to do the interview because you've been referred by so-and-so. It's very important to make your interviewee feel very important and that they've been referred by somebody else who's important. And at the end of the day, ask for help. When can they meet? And also, ask if there's anybody else at the end of the interview that maybe you should interview as well. So here's an example, okay, that sort of hits these key points, verbois. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of the interview. All right, in the beginning, it's like a date, okay? One interviewee, all right? Well, date's not necessarily like that, but basically you have an interviewee, a note taker. Well, maybe you have a chaperone or something like that if you were doing that. But it's good to have an interviewee and somebody take notes. I normally do both, but there's a number of times I will have an intern who will take notes so I can focus on listening and really engage in the conversation. Or I'll tape it so that I can transcribe it. And then thank them, frame the interview, and start with some softball questions. And then as you get into the interview, expand into those more significant questions as you move down into a funnel. Get them to tell a story. This is a great high gain. Tell me a story about when. How'd you get into this business? Okay? How'd you get in? Tell me a story how you came to Santa Barbara. Okay? Look for solutions and priorities. And we'll talk about biases later, but you need to disarm your own biases. And watch body languages. That's why live is very important. You have to watch how people are reacting. And as I mentioned before, make it conversational. Be active in your listening. And what that means is that you need to be watching your interviewee. You need to be acknowledging and nodding and taking notes and leading in. Your body language is very key. And make sure you don't talk too much, but you prod and push, you pull. And you never pitch, okay? So, here's a great cartoon. Yeah, you really think this idea is cool. I can't wait to tell my co-founder that we're ready to quit our day jobs. Yeah, I was talking about this iced coffee. But, sure, your idea is cool too. It means there's a disconnect, okay? And that's the thing, is that the interviewer is not reading the interviewee well. And we get to the concept of time management. The time management is very key. You say you're going to take 15 minutes, don't take more. Watch the time. Okay, balance it. Have a schedule of where you're going to go through in terms of how you're going to interview, and stay focused and stay on the reservation. And at the end of the interview, summarize your key points. Ask if anyone else you would recommend. I always advocate that. And thank the interviewee and let them know if any next steps. Or in this case with El Chapo, you have to make sure that you get out of town quickly. And as you know here, that he was picked up by the federales very quickly after that interview there. So anyway, getting back to doing the interview and recording the interview, there are different philosophies on it. You can record it, which is the gold standard, okay, and you can transcribe it. There are great services like rem.com, rev.com, rev.com, that very inexpensive to be able to transcribe your interviews so you have those notes. You can take notes yourself, which I do, or you can have a third person. Believe it or not, I like to take my own notes. It keeps me very active in listening. And I find with my notes, I flip my interview reports, which are usually short. They're like about a page and a half for half an hour with bullets to a client literally within the if I do it like in the morning, by the afternoon the client has that quick report and output that's there. So there are different strokes for different folks. McKinsey likes to have the additional person. I know other folks that like to record. I know some of you all have tried to record me. And remember, you need to advise folks and get permission for recording that interview based on state law as well. And then after the interview, make sure those notes are ready with key takeaways. Fast, literally in 24 hours. Send that thank you note, keep your team in the loop, and update. In our case of entrepreneurship, we update our business model canvas. But if you're working on a project plan, you need to make sure that your project plan or whatever activity you're working on, your business strategy is updated. So document, follow up, and analyze and act. And let's make sense of that interview. Quantitate, look for patterns, look for false positives, and truth curve. Here's an example of how we can quantitate the data. We can pull that data together based on quantitative base questions that are there. Okay? Look for patterns as well in terms of in the data. And even though it's qualitative, there are ways. We did this when I did our startup bridge project. We put the data and then we started pulling common feedback and being able to categorize it. Okay? So as you can see here, I'm starting to see a pattern here. You just need to talk to 1,385 more people before we can make a decision. Well, believe it or not, in qualitative, you need to have a lot more than 50 to make a generalizable decision. Okay, that's one limitation of quant. You really need to have several hundred, if not close to 1,000, depending on the power in that analysis, to get generalizability. So, you know what? It's a funny cartoon, but you know what? It does raise an issue. The bottom line is the more the better. And National Science Foundation do advocate that when we do get out of the building interviews for startups, we typically look for well over 100 interviews to really get a sense of, are we on target? Have we proven our hypothesis, or have we knocked it down? And at the end of the day, you're trying to get the data because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get reality. Okay? And this is the important thing about doing market research. It's not there to prove that your baby is beautiful. It is really to get a sense of, do I have something or do I have BS? Okay? And so We need to think about this as we go through, if we have a new product, going from conversation to a paper, back in napkin, to a prototype, to a live product. You've got to have data to support your position. And the same thing is with a marketing campaign, or even uncovering what client customers need, is more data as you progress along will give you a better sense of what is reality. And what we're doing at the end of the day is very simple. We're de-risking the project and the investment into the project. And it's much better and smarter to de-risk with knowledge and information than to go out there and try to fire without thinking before you shoot. Remember, it's not ready, fire, aim. It's ready, aim, and fire. So at the end of the day, once you get your data, nice little summary report, not too long. Remember, attention of executives is not very long. Use your Mento technique. Make your points. So I'm going to segue real quick into question strategies, because I also did notice as I was looking at some of the surveys, some improvement opportunities in terms of questions. So hopefully you all know the 5 W's and the big H. And the power question of all time, I will tell you, is one of them, is why. It's the little kid's question, but I'll tell you what. Use 5 whys to get to root cause. Why is your power question? Remember to use open-ended, okay? Allow the interviewee to elaborate, okay? And watch out if they're avoiding a question and getting off the reservation. That means they are avoiding answering it, or they're trying to get into a different topic with open-ended. But open-ended are ideal. And here's some examples up in the upper right-hand corner. Remember drill down. So as you're talking, you need to be attentive. So you have your funnels and you seize opportunities and you probe and you egg on for clarity. And then what you also do is that you'd want to clarify. Sometimes you're going to repeat like a parrot what the client says. It's also good to show that you're actively listening. And sometimes you will use that yes, no. And I hate using yes or no. I much prefer, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 7, where do you fit? How do you feel around this? Yes and no is more to confirm a position. And I always like to tag a why on the back end. Closed-ended, as we get into this yes-no concept, is, I find yes-no is limited, and then we talked about why. So let's use the rating scale, okay, and a why that follows. So then we get into framing. Now, what do you mean by framing? And we've talked about framing from the concept of our scope of work, but it also can be a way of being able to direct a particular answer that you want. So let's use this example. Imagine that the U.S. is preparing for an outbreak of an unusual Asian disease expected to kill 600 people. 2 alternative programs to combat the disease have been proposed. Assume that the exact scientific estimate of the consequences of the program are as shown below. Which of the 2 programs would you favor? Program A or B? Program A is adopted, 200 people will be saved. Program B is adopted, there's 1/3 probability that 600 people will be saved, 2/3 probability that no people will be saved. All right. Or C, if program C is adopted, 400 will die. And if D is 1/3 probability that nobody will die and 2/3 that 600 will probably die. So which would you agree to? I think most would tend to go with more of the positive outcome. So depending on how you tee up the answers, that you can actually direct your interviewee in a particular response direction. Okay? So that's just something to think about. So here's another example. Frozen yogurt. 20% fat, 80% fat free. Which would you buy? I think I would lean towards the fat free myself. And that gets to from leading the witness, because what it does is injects bias. So according to the New York Times, alpha beta is the most promising new cancer drug. Don't you think that's the case? So, and I see this a lot in business. People are trying to confirm their biases. I have a client right now, a really, really bright scientist who is trying to build a case for his direction. As I look at this, I'm going, this is all confirmation bias. So you really need to watch this out. And you don't want to be into a pitch or sales mode either. And then finally, you get into question biases. And this is when you do your interviewing. And I think one of the problems that we deal with is we have clients involved. They want certain things, but you want real data. You don't want garbage in, garbage out. You don't want bias. So here are several different question biases to think about. That of selection, which are familiar subjects with known opinions. Confirmation, which is seeking out that information to confirm your point of view. Generalization, which is taking an observation from a few and generalizing from the broad. Oh, 3. Dentists say that this gum is wonderful. That means all the dentists must think it's wonderful and it's great for your teeth. Overconfidence, which is very dangerous in business, which is I'm always right. So if you have some guy who owns his business, he's overconfident, he knows it all, you know what? Guess what? He's not recognizing the potential being wrong. And the boomerang for him is, what's the potential? What would happen if you were wrong? Have you ever thought about that? And you know what? That's actually something I'm going to think about for our August Ridge client. Optimism, which is overly optimistic, not considering failure of plan B, which ties back to that overconfidence. And acquiescence, where the subject says, enough, I'm going to give you the answer you want, it's because I know you're my friend, I don't want to hurt your feelings, or you've beaten me over the head with so many questions, And what happens is some folks will give compliments to your product and you will mistake them as buying signs. Watch out for BS. Okay? And by the way, this is the other John York. He's Professor York, who is the head of the entrepreneurship program here. But I think the world of him, and I think that the paper he put together on this is just really great. And I would recommend you guys, you can do good interviews, just understand your biases that you have. That leads to what we call the MOM test, which is something that the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship use. I was exposed to that, and what it's about is talking about your idea, talk about them, the customer, and their life, and instead of your idea, and ask for specifics in the past rather than generics or opinions about the future. And talk less, listen more. Make sure you deflect compliments, anchor fluff, dig beneath the ideas, and Google for trivia. So, here's the MOM test. You know what? Before I answer, you might just want to stop the video here and go through here and see what it makes a good question. And see what of these questions you might be able to use is you insert them into your interview framework, which are the funnels, which tie back to your objectives, which tie back to your client needs, which tie back to your scope that you're trying to. So you need to make sure things align. So now that I've done that and sort of reinforced what our original point was of this video, I'm just going to show you so you have a quick glance at what are good questions and what might not be the best. So anyway, I certainly hope you got a lot out of this, and if there's anything else I should have asked, by all means let me know. I look forward to our next class. I certainly hope this helps you become a better interviewer and also to design truly extraordinary questionnaires. And remember one last thing about questionnaires, not too long, because you will have fatigue. All right, good night. Enjoy, everybody. I'll see you in class soon.